This is the Gen Y Leaders Podcast. Welcome to the Gen Y Leaders Podcast, where we guide millennials to become the next generation of business leaders and entrepreneurs. I'm your host, Eric Huey, and multiple times a month, we bring you interviews from high-performing millennials who are challenging perceptions and changing expectations of our generation. Our mission is to help you overcome fear, take action, and go confidently in the direction of your dreams. It's time to start preparing now, mainly because 10,000 baby boomers are retiring every day, which will create a vacuum of career opportunities that you've been waiting for. Will you be ready? Kristin, welcome to the Gen Y Leaders Podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. Appreciate it. So to start off, if you could just tell viewers and listeners who you are and what you do, that'd be awesome.
Sure. My name is Kristin Hems, and I've been a small business owner for a little over 5 years now. We started a third-party event planning company, which essentially means we help corporations with their events, either with their internal team or as an external planner that they just kind of bring in. And yeah, we've been doing it for 5 years, and I have a 2-year-old. I think that's my whole life in a nutshell.
Yeah. Next, if you could just tell us a little about, your motivation, your why event planning?
Yeah. As cheesy as it sounds, the movie The Wedding Planner, not that I have any desire to do weddings, but that movie kind of kicked it into gear for me and made the wheels start spinning. And in high school, I told my dad that this is what I really wanted to do, and he told me that wasn't a real job, and I had to go get a college degree and use it. And now we're here, and my dad actually does our accounting for us, so I certainly showed him.
Yeah, way to go. Things come full circle, huh?
Exactly.
That's funny. And kudos to him for changing his mind and supporting you. That's cool.
Yes.
Today's topic's all about the future of in-person events. You're obviously an event planner. I'm in media. We have plenty of events, and right now, as of this recording, we're in June of 2020, and a lot of here in Kansas City, we're starting to come out of this self-quarantine and all that. So a lot of people, I think, have concern of like, man, are we ever going to go back to in-person events? If so, what that looks like. So I thought you had a really interesting perspective on that, being in the driver's seat for a company that does event planning, and thought you could really bring some value to our listeners today for that. So if you could maybe just start it off at a high level of how's COVID-19 affected your business personally?
COVID-19 has taken us out. It 100%. Annie and I, thankfully, are very conservative business owners. Always make sure we have enough in the bank to survive 6+ months. But COVID-19 brought everything to a halt very quickly. Yeah. It's really interesting. This was supposed to be our busiest year ever, and now we're here, which is great.
Yeah. That's heartbreaking.
It is. I mean, it kind of is what it is. And it's also just fascinating how quickly it developed. So we had a couple of clients that were supposed to have events at the end of April and the very first part of May. Well, in March, there was all of this discussion about we shouldn't gather, we shouldn't do this. And so both of them decided to postpone until August, September. And then it became a global pandemic. And then hotels kind of changed their stance. Had we waited a little bit, we probably could have gotten out of all of our contracts at 100%, but because we chose to make the best decision we could, right, with the information that we had, we've postponed, which I'm thankful for, and still, knock on wood, hoping that they go, because there's still a discussion if August is far enough out, if it will be safe by August.
Yeah.
So
let's hope so. Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Prayers and hopes that this thing gets back to normal, and where everybody's back in groups and there's no concern come August, so you guys can get rolling again. In regard to this, you had made a graphic, or rather, gathered some research and created an infographic after the fact, your own first party data, if you will, on people's outlook for the rest of the year. Are people comfortable going to in-person events in 2020, and what's that look like? What are their expectations? So I think it's a really cool graphic for anyone listening. We're definitely going to share that so you can get eyes on it. But Kristin, if you could, maybe what's your overall summary? Like, what would be your thesis or key takeaways from that data?
Yeah, well, I think it's important to note that we asked this information of our clients, our hotel partners, our travel directors, so people that travel with us all the time. And then we also put it on our social media, which admittedly we don't have a huge following. So those are also people that travel quite a bit and I would say have a pretty high tolerance to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
So our kind of question and hypothesis was really selfish. We wanted to know when our clients might feel comfortable and feel ready. And so we made this anonymous survey and said, hey guys, just tell us kind of where you are, what you're gauging. And I think the results were really interesting. Over 50% of our client base traveled 1 to 5 times a quarter, which is pretty common. I mean, Annie and I were traveling at least once or twice a month. And so I think when you travel that frequently, you have a different tolerance level for going back to travel.
Yeah.
But overall, I think in the next 6 months or so, with some changes, people are kind of ready to get back to it, which is refreshing to see. And I think kind of what we're seeing right now in June of 2020, that businesses are starting to reopen and people want to try and find a new normal or resume their normal, kind of at least make their own choice about it.
Right. Yeah, great insights. Appreciate that. And on that note, you mentioned, within this year, it does look likely. The stat I read was 50% of people said they'd be willing to attend an in-person event before the end of 2020. So is, in your eyes, is that a high enough percentage? And, a lot of fall events, holiday events towards the end of the year. What's your take on that?
I think it'll be really interesting because I think there's a couple of different factors that play into it. I also think the other question that we asked was how soon would you be willing to host a client-facing event? Mm-hmm. And that one was within 6 months as well. And that percentage was really high. But I think part of that is you have control.
Right.
So I get to set up the rules of if you're coming to my event, you're wearing a mask or you're not wearing a mask. And we're doing this. And I know what the fail-safes are at the hotel. Whereas if I'm attending it, I might have to dig for that information a little bit more. So I would encourage people who are trying to host an event this year to certainly share all of their communication and their protocols. I think that the closer to fall and this year is really optimistic. I think a lot of people are still afraid of the second surge that the media keeps talking about. I think a lot of people want to see a vaccine.
Yeah. Dang, Lake the Ozarks just ruined everything.
Yes. Yeah. National news. Here we are.
Way to put us on the map, huh?
Yes. But I think that the hesitation is really if companies have lost this much money over the past quarter, how do you go ahead and make that investment moving forward, not knowing if it's actually going to go? Right. So I think if we see an uptick in events closer to fall, they'll be planned in 4 weeks or less, which is common for us. So that's great news.
Nothing like short notice, right?
Yeah. We operate best under pressure.
That's right. So the concerns that people had, you alluded to this in your last point a little bit, but they're really not a lot different as far as the standards that should be upheld for what we've already been experiencing. It's, washing your hands, it's wearing the mask, doing social distancing. So how do you think those factor in? And do you think the events at the end of the year will have those incorporated? Are there any of those that you think will be neglected or not really of importance by the time we get there?
That's a really good question. I think it's hard to know because I feel like there's very strong camps that are pro-mask and anti-mask, and they feel very passionately about their stance. And so we've had some clients tell us if we have to force everyone to wear a mask, we're not hosting an event. That's not how we want to do it. We want to be able to see our attendees' faces. Yeah. We want to interact with them. We want to go to a cocktail party and not be standing 6 feet apart yelling at each other.
Right.
And so I think it again comes back to the tolerance. I also think the other big factor that's in play right now is that there are a lot of companies. 75% of people said that their company had a travel restriction in place. So even if Kristin, as an individual, am ready to travel, but my company, Third Avenue, says, hey, you're grounded.
Yeah.
Then there's not really a lot I can do.
Right. Yep. All great insights. And it'll be really interesting to see how it plays out. But that's a great point. I mean, it'd be really hard to have an in-person event with networking and meeting people for the first time and you can't really see their face or probably even hear them that well. So, gosh, again, I just hope everything gets back to normal and people feel more and more comfortable as the year progresses into the end of 2020. So on that note, looking past 2020 into say 2021, 2022, all throughout this, people have said, use the phrase new normal that you mentioned earlier, like, I've heard people aren't going to shake hands anymore and, do that stuff. And so like as an extrovert, that freaks me out. Like I shake hands, I hug, like that'd be crushing. So I guess what's your take on that? I mean, is this going to have long-term effects, this COVID-19 on events? Do you think that'll change the outlook of the way the events are planned themselves and then the physical, structure, layout of events, things like that?
Yeah, I think more than anything, it will probably change the way events are contracted.
Mm-hmm.
So from our perspective, there are a lot of clients that we have that go to larger events, let's say an auto show, a convention, etc. If those events are canceled, that doesn't get you out of your hotel contracts. So I think that there will be new clauses put in place that say, hey, if the thing I'm coming to town for is no longer happening, then I'm not going to pay my hotel contract or my hotel bill because there's no reason for me to come anymore.
Right.
So I think that
the global pandemic clause.
Yeah, which is really interesting because now, I mean, I'm sure you've heard a lot of insurance companies, pandemic is excluded, riots are excluded, all of the things that people like need help with right now are excluded.
Yeah.
But I think hotels are going to have to walk that fine line. I think most of them have done a really good job being flexible and being understanding, but they're a business too.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a lot of employees that rely on them. So for everybody to just say, nope, I'm not paying my bill, doesn't really work. So I think from a long-term perspective, I think contracting will change.
Yeah.
I think you'll be hard pressed to find a self-serving buffet before the end of 2021.
Great point.
If not 2022. A lot of hotels have said, we're still going to have buffets, but we're also going to have a server's attendant at each station to feed it to you. So you're not touching the spoon. I'm not touching the spoon. It's really one person. So it's things like that people don't necessarily kind of think about and register until you're at an event and you're like, oh, I don't know if I want to touch that.
Yeah.
I don't know the last time that was switched out, but it's not realistic to put out a new spoon for the eggs every time somebody walks by. But it's also not realistic long-term for the cost of events not to increase if there aren't these cost savings measures. And if everybody has to sit 6 feet apart, you need triple the amount of space for 50 people than you originally needed. So
yeah, that's a great point. A lot of things to be thinking about.
Yeah.
So that's great perspective from the events themselves. But what about like event planning companies like yourself or the corporations planning the events? Besides the contractual obligation component, is there anything that you think will be interesting as we move forward in terms of having a quote unquote backup plan or plan B to fall back on?
Yeah, I think the plan B really comes back into that contracting standpoint. I think a lot of people may not plan as far in advance.
Mm-hmm.
I think you'll do things differently. Like maybe you won't register on site, but you'll register and get all of your conference packet information mailed to you in advance. I don't know. I don't think that virtual events can take the place of in-person events.
Yeah.
I truthfully don't believe that's possible. And I think part of it is my passion for the industry and my livelihood. I might be biased, but I have a hard time believing that people don't need the personal connection, that they go and they get in an event and nobody wants to sit on a Zoom call for 3 days when I could have gone to a 3 days in-person conference. It's just not quite the same.
Yeah, I'd agree with that wholeheartedly. And I mean, I'm probably biased too, being an extrovert, but me and my wife were able to get out for one of the first times last week and see a group of friends. And it was just so refreshing to see people in person and not through a screen where
Yeah.
After all day you've been on screens and phone calls at work and have that, digital fatigue and whatnot. So
Right.
I agree, and I don't think they're replaceable. But as we wrap up here, one couple key questions I always ask, one being what people, books, or resources have made an impact on your personal life or in your professional life?
It's a great question. I actually talked to Annie a little bit about this because she obviously is one person.
Yeah.
She's my partner in crime.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that we learned early on is we felt like since we were in the service industry, like the technology companies and think tanks and startups and all of that stuff just doesn't apply to us. They don't get it. When in reality, you can learn something from every business. You all share the same struggles when it comes to employee management or taxes or things of that nature. So one of the things that really impacted me was having that aha light bulb moment that was like, okay, we're not that special. We're not that different. We all have kind of common ground. My mom is an entrepreneur too, so I would say she's had a pretty large impact on my life and made obviously quite an impression if this is what I chose to do with my livelihood. And then we work a lot with travel directors, and in the world of events, there's no one right way to do something. You can reach the same result and do it 1,000 different ways. And so I always take time. We hire the best in the industry to make our events run smoothly, but I also try and make time when we're on site executing an event to learn from those people. Hey, Scott. Hey, Judy. Hey, Melvin. How are you doing this? Am I doing it the hard way? Can you teach me something new? And then as far as a book, I would have to say that Shonda Rhimes' Year of Yes, where she talks about taking an entire year and not saying no to anything and really just opening herself up.
I haven't heard of that one.
It's kind of a feel-good book, a self-help book, but sure. Yeah, it's all about just opening yourself up to other possibilities. And she did it for an entire year and watched the way her mindset changed, her life changed, things like that.
Thanks for the recommendations. Yeah, I'll be sure to link to that book in the show notes for sure. And then lastly, where can people best get a hold of you if they want advice on event planning or to, employ your services? Yeah, we would love that connection. Our website is www.thirdevents.com. There's a form there that you can reach out to us, or I'm sure my email is probably plastered all over the internet. So it's Kristin at thirdevents.com. Awesome. Kristin, thanks so much for your time today and the value provided our audience. Thanks, Eric. I appreciate being a part of it. Take care. That wraps up today's episode. We hope to have brought you some valuable key takeaways. Most importantly, whatever you learned, take action on it. Apply it to your life. Apply it to your career. Motivation and inspiration only come as a result of taking that first step. So if you're enjoying the podcast, don't forget to like and subscribe on whichever platform you found the show. You can also follow us on all the major social media platforms or contact us directly at genwhyleaders@gmail.com. That's GENWHY leaders@gmail.com. Until next time, I'm Eric Huey, and thanks for listening to the Gen Y Leaders Podcast.